shkua për intervistën interaktiv, do të flasim sonte me Bodo që është pjesë e Këshillit për politika të demokratizimit me seli në Berlin për çështjen e diskutimit të kufive ndërmjet Kosovës dhe Serbisë. Mr. Weber, welcome to KTV.
Thank you, Chairman.
What's your take on what's happening right now? There's a new phase of the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia, and both presidents are eager to achieve a deal, a historic deal, they say, likely with any cost. What's your take on that?
You see, Gemma, to me, we had a cradle over years, unfortunately, the dialogue slipping into a crisis. And I think, in a way, this announcement of the new phase of the dialogue, which basically meant departure from the cradle approach of the 2013 political dialogue towards jumping to the end point, which was always there announced, but never even came close, was a kind of implicit recognition that the previous gradual approach had hit a wall, and it was into deep crisis. So there was some attractiveness in this gradual approach. I would say especially there was some concession in this for Serbia, because the dialogue we tend to forget, and the actors basically tried to make forget over the last year, especially Belgrade's spin, what the dialogue originally was about. It started with German Chancellor Merkel's statement that the time of border change in Kosovo is over. That was 2011. We almost forgot about these statements. And then basically, with the August 2011 press conference of Merkel in Belgrade with then President Tadic, where she basically put up a set of 3 conditions for Serbia's EU integration perspective. And this was basically a policy of saying, you need to face reality. We need to come to a reality-based politics in our relationship if you want to become an EU member state. And that means, what everybody knew in Serbia knew since 2008, Declaration of Independence of Kosovo, that Kosovo is gone from Serbia. That though they don't like the idea, at some point they need to make this fact public and need to base politics and policy and regulation of relations between Kosovo and Serbia as bilateral relations based on that reality. And this was basically more or less implicit, partly explicit with the April Agreement that already included a kind of at least implicit de facto recognition of the independence of Kosovo by Serbia, integration of northern Kosovo institutions into the Kosovo state institutional framework, if not even the euro, which I remind you, some even legal scholars in Serbia at that time insisted. So this, was the basis for you get progress on accession, which they got by accepting this reality, which they did in 2013. Famous interview in Nin in March 2013 by then Prime Minister Dacic, which sounds almost like it's not the same Dacic as you were hearing over the last year, that there has been a taboo in Serbia for 10 years. We lie to ourselves that Kosovo is ours, Kosovo is gone, whether we like it or not, that we can only return it on tanks, and there's no readiness to this, so we need to shift to reality and focus on safeguarding a normal life for the Serbian community in Kosovo. So, this was, the process. April Agreement, almost everybody has forgotten, was officially termed the first agreement. So, there was this idea, this is the first agreement, municipal institutions, police, judiciary, and then later you will have the second and third and so on. So a gradual process of integration. Probably the second, though it has never been defined, agreement would have been then about healthcare and education, for example. So, but unfortunately, we had a period in which now we can discuss whose fault it is. I would say EU institutions in Brussels had a major responsibility there. They left some maneuvering space to the parties, and Balkan politics, if you leave some maneuvering space, you signal some weakness. So both sides, especially from the beginning, Belgrade tried to exploit, and they were successful exploiting that maneuvering space in postponing implementation of agreement, trying to reopen discussions, postponing implementation, and at the same time this process becoming less and less substantiated and more as a closed shop process, which in a way, negotiations always in a way to a certain extent have to be behind closed doors. There needs to be some you know, feedbacking back to national institutions, into, you know, the closed shop becoming a source of legitimacy of power for both actors in there, but even I would say for Ms. Ashton, but later Ms. Mogherini. So, and unfortunately, this dialogue lost its strategic direction, and in the meanwhile, you know, over the last 3 years, we have seen some more dramatic crises in the West of the EU internally with Brexit, Trump administration coming in, so some signs of weakness. So what we had, I fear, over the last year with, since we have the declaration or announcement of the new phase with strong baggage spin to talk about some solutions which are entirely outside the framework of the original framework of the dialogue, pretending, you know, that this is about a compromise over status question, which it wasn't. That was the condition from the beginning, the clear one. The status question is solved. You need to have some face saving there from Serbia. This was very much within this, but they tried to, you know, turn it upside down. And of course, I would say that this 1 year also was badly prepared, and which to me, I fear shows that Ms. Mogherini, unlike Ms. Ashton, but it's not only to her, also some other actors who have been less engaged. I fear Germany, for example, was not very well prepared for this final negotiation for the new phase, at least because, you know, neither had there been any preparations, I fear, nor had there been all key actors being prepared, especially one of the key actors of the whole dialogue, Germany, was absent because announcement of the new phase when our parliamentary elections started, so which, of course, unintendedly ended up in a long intermediate period until spring this year because of unusually long government formation negotiations. But in this period, you know, you already had this kind of the process getting out of control, obviously. Belgrade, I assume, trying to play on perceived weakness of the West. Brussels, obviously, just round up, moving towards something that has only now, about a month ago, become public and exploded, basically, thinking that they run the show. They can run the show without the member states, and their role is really about facilitation and dialogue, and not facilitation and dialogue within this previously set framework that needs key member states. So I think what we have seen there is a year of in limbo, the process that then, unfortunately, obviously, with some first signs of some, what I would say not is a shift of the policy position on Kosovo and the dialogue by Washington and Paris, but the loss of any clear position. There's no clear positions. So a weakening of position that has then, I fear, by political actors here on the Kosovo side, interpreted in the wrong way that, you know, if the traditional allies are weakened, like which has always been more Washington and Berlin, then this is the way to go for this is the direction to go and to follow through with Mr. Vučić in his pressure towards land swap or whatever it is, exchange of territory, division, but I fear that they forgot about that. You know, Germany has not disappeared and will not disappear, and I think there has been some major miscalculations.
So, what was President Faust thinking when he talks like for months now that there should be? He calls it border adjustment, but he insists that the Preševo Valley 3 municipalities should join Kosovo, and Kosovo will not give up north. Is that even possible?
Well, you know, I mean, there are two questions here in your question, if I may say so. One is it possible? The second question would be, what would be the consequences? Let me start with the consequences. I think there was an op-ed in the New York Times last week, and the subheading shows that, you know, how much there's a certain erosion and decline of some principles in the West. It went like virtually about, or literally about, you know, yes, this would be ethnic cleansing in a peaceful way, but at least it would be peace. I mean, this reminds me of some discussions in the West, in the confusion in the 1990s Balkan wars. This, let me be very clear, this is what we currently have seen, and especially over the last 4 weeks, is a return to a logic of an ideology of ethno-territorialization, which is only about what the 90s have been about, and we know what it's been. It's about who controls territory. You remember the old nationalistic ideology, not only in Serbia, but also in Croatia and anywhere else. If you're in a minority, you're basically in a slave position. So you need to remain in a majority. That is what led to the Balkan Wars. And this is what was rejected as a taboo in the Western principle to bring some peace and order into the Balkans. However inconsistent that Western policy has remained and insufficient. So out of a certain weakness of some parts of the West, going back to some ideas that we have seen how they played out at the end in the 90s. And at the same time, because of our weakness, and you see a lot of consultants, PR guys now on their way, very well-paid people in the West, trying to convince the Western politicians and Western public that, no, I mean, this cannot have consequences because we don't want them. That shows you how much this is a crazy idea. Now to your other question, what did your president think? Listen, I mean, I come from a Western policy analysis group, and our focus is on Western politics and criticizing Western politics and warning and making proposals. We don't meddle into domestic politics, but I have to say that probably your role to ask your president what was his proposal. I've remained confused, to be honest, and I assume that this is what is the impression of most people in Kosovo. If you're on the one side for a long time, and he just repeated it, I think, in a recent op-ed, say, that we don't see a way how the West can convince Serbia or pressure them to recognize Kosovo within its borders, which I think is wrong, because we have seen that they de facto accepted independence of Kosovo, recognized it in 2013. Then, we need to find a different solution. So, I mean, on the one side, you cannot pressure Serbia to recognize. On the other side, you talk about border adjustment, but at the same time, as I understand, your president said this has nothing to do with giving up the north or exchanging territory. It only means that you add part of Serbia, not only Kosovo, Bujanovac and Preševo. Rationally, to me, this doesn't add up. So I don't know what is this. Either it's complete loss of any rational judgment, or it's basically standing for something else, which, as far as I understood, he has rejected, that he's proposing a land swap. So I think this is part, of this whole process that has become more intransparent than it had to be. The Brussels negotiation is actually the last year, and which has completely gone out of control, so that you end up with a process where now we have this statement by your president, the recent statement since John Bolton went public in Ukraine from Belgrade officials, up to a very confusing statement, which to me is a clear sign of retreat by Mr. Vučić in his speech in Mitrovica. And at the end, probably, if we are at the point where this idea has already collapsed, which is my assessment, you probably will never know, what were the maps what was the idea, what was discussed, what were the maps on the table.
But everyone's fear is here that Serbia will insist to take the north in a new deal, which maybe would allow Kosovo to join UN or something. So, and you know how important the north is with the lake and everything.
Right. Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, that part is clear that this is part of the Belgrade push. I mean, they have never, as I said, and as you know as well as I do, they have never put any map on the table. So we don't know if the proposal is the whole of the north or part of the north, though I have a hard time to believe that how any Serbian government could argue on, drawing any lines in between the north, between some of the municipalities, leaving some out, others in. So yeah, I mean, this has been the plan, but from what I've seen since the last Brussels round, which were basically a failure, a lot of announcement about the big plan and the big plan during Mr. Vučić's visit to Kosovo, to Gazivode and Mitrovica. I think there has been a lot of confusion and a lot of excitement about his speech, especially Mitrovica, about the naming of Milosevic, which was unusual. But to me, this was a lot of smokescreen. I think there was only one substantial sentence in this speech, at least how I read it. It was the sentence about, which he basically repeated, I think yesterday at the board meeting of his party, saying that the policy I pursued, which was land swap, will not succeed. It has collapsed because of Ms. Merkel and the Kosovo politicians.
So how important is obviously Germany and Ms. Merkel? You know how much people here believe Germany and Chancellor Merkel. And we've seen some of her statements when she met with some of the regional leaders like the Croatian president and the Macedonian prime minister, I think, that there will be no border changes in the Balkans. Is Germany going to go through the end with the stance?
Well, you know, from what I see and what you can see in public, and though there has been a lot of media reporting spin in Serbia especially, also here as far as I could see about Germany softening its position, they may back down. Germany has not backed down a millimeter. And I think some more soft-spoken language of Ms. Merkel, let's say in the press conference with Croatian Prime Minister Plenković, in which, to my surprise, Prime Minister Plenković was very outspoken, has been misinterpreted in that direction, because Ms. Merkel's style normally is more soft-spoken than, you know, very macho style of statements. But in essence, there has been no millimeter of moving. And there simply cannot and will not be any millimeter of moving. And as I said, I think what we have seen is a backtracking of Belgrade. It's not completely clear yet, because, you know, the whole spin and rhetoric is very pathetic in Serbia. So it's sometimes very hard to really, you know, detect the message between the whole pathetic narrative. But I think if one, you know, knows that Germany has not backed down, then I think there's a clear way of reading the recent statements of Mr. Vučić and his performance basically since the September 7th, basically completely unsuccessful meeting in Brussels, where there were pre-announcement about, you know, they will now basically publish their plans. So no, Germany will not back down. And I think if one wants to make sense of what has happened over the last about 4 weeks since the Alba Forum and the John Bolton press conference in Kiev and in Ukraine, then I would say that there has been some obviously group misjudgment, grave misjudgment, at least in Brussels and Belgrade, probably even in Pristina. I cannot judge. As I said, the Pristina side has the most unclear statement about what their performance and their policy really was in this.
Actually, everyone here is against President Faust.
Well, okay, but let me just finish to say that I think there has been a grave misjudgment. I have the impression that the major perception or idea was, you know, if some of the key countries, the US has always been number one here, has lost its principal position, because they're losing their principal position, Trump administration almost everything. And if France is not very strong here, which I think has been partly misinterpreted, the French role, it's not that they have become strong advocates of a land swap. It's more, I think, what we have seen in the context of Mr. Macron's speech in Sofia about no enlargement before internal integration, and in France blocking a positive decision in end of June for open accession talks this year with Albania and Macedonia. This is more a position on disinterest in the region. So, I mean, this is more the position of actors who want to see any deal be struck to have the problem removed and not solved.
So I was going to ask you about the different EU position, because we've seen Ms. Mogherini and Mr. Hahn actually quite ready to listen to everything and see what the both parties can agree with each other, and how important it is for Germany to have other countries think the same, like France. And we've seen Austria actually, who really, Chancellor Kurz and the foreign minister as well, they're ready to listen to what the parties can reach.
Well, I mean, you've also seen the Vienna Gymnich meeting after the Alba Forum, where the Austrian foreign minister had a very different position in her press conference, a very critical one to land swap than the government performance at the Alba Forum. Listen, I mean, everybody knows, unfortunately, what's going on in Austrian politics, this joint coalition, the migration politics. I just need to remember the court's gig for the Gruevski-Vremero during the November 2016 elections, where he praised the Gruevski government for bringing Macedonia closer to the EU, basically as a reward for their closing the Greek-Macedonian border on the Balkan route. So I think on the Austrian side, I fear, unfortunately, this is part of the populism, nationalism rattling the European Union. France, as I said, I think there has been some misinterpretation as a proactive partition or land swap policy. I think, as I said, this is more about for Mr. Macron everything being acceptable, because as he's shown with his decision on Albania and Macedonia, that he simply is ignorant of the region and doesn't care about the region. And so something I fear that is also the mindset in Brussels, this idea of facilitation, that as if there were no principles in the dialogue, as if the dialogue had not been based and started on principle, and any deal is a good deal, and just don't look into what is the substance and the consequences.
If not land swap and border adjustments, how will the deal will look like between Kosovo and Serbia, and will it be possible to be reached before the elections in May of next year?
Well, I think this very clearly shows what would have been better to have, let's say, early this year in spring, when the new German government came in, a serious reset, preparatory reset for real negotiations, which would have had to have the statement and clear message that we now unfortunately got through this one-month crisis, is, that stop this border change spin, this Belgrade needs a compromise on status issues in order to be able to recognize that Kosovo is gone, which, as I said, is a completely different story from what they had accepted in 2013. So I think a clear sign of EU strength and EU resolve is needed to make a serious reset. I think we're now in a kind of intermediate limbo period in which Belgrade is more in a position of complaining and like crybaby of saying, okay, poor Vučić, I did not succeed with my policy. I did not get the support, blaming everybody from the Orthodox Church to the opposition, which of course, unfortunately, is not a credible factor in Serbia. But I mean, there's nobody to blame except for himself. He was told for many months to stop drafting maps, and he just thought he can get through with it. So I mean, as I said, serious preparatory reset, and then to start really substantiated debates, because all these debates are now back to this very virtual debate about territory and ethnicity. They are not about, what this dialogue was once about, regulating bilateral relations, having a reality-based relationship between two states, however painful this is for Serbia with its most recent history. Not that they are innocent on this development. And then, having a serious, substantiated debate about minority rights, safeguarding the life of Kosovo Serbs, because unfortunately this is something that is an indicator of how this dialogue unfortunately went in a complete crisis. This was to be about, situation of Kosovo Serbs. And now this is a situation where, I mean, Kosovo Serbs to me live on a Belgrade-controlled patronage system. They are more enslaved by Belgrade than they really, which is now, their starting point for, Serbs needing to have a safe life here. But I mean, living on a state budget and on a state controlled by Serbia, it is not productive. It is not preventing brain drain, people leaving, not to talk about the effect on migration that this talk of land swap had in the south of the Ibar and the Serb municipalities over the last 4 years. There are many people, from what I understand, who didn't leave earlier and now starting to think about leaving. So we need to get back, I think, to a substantiated debate about what are the bilateral issues that nobody ever mentioned. We didn't come to them about what's about missing persons, some property issues, succession, what is with issues of return, and then what is really about what is basic needs and interests of local citizens, Serb citizens, and how can you regulate a normal life? And is this the association? Because the association, again, has become a very virtual debate about, some mythologized debate about competencies. Nobody's talking about, what is the substance of these competencies? Why should they have them? What is the use to have executive competencies, to have joint companies on, let's say, waste management and water management by 10 municipalities without territorial integrity? So let's have a real debate, what is really in the basic needs and interests of Kosovo Serbs. There's no rule of law. There's no rule of law in the north. Transfer of judiciary and police from Serbian state institution under the Kosovo umbrella has not improved the existence of the rule of law, or it hasn't removed the problem of the non-existence of the rule of law. It's the same, so maybe even worse. So we need to return, I think, the dialogue after a real reset to a point where it's clear that on status issues, there's nothing to debate. Probably Serbia needs something, symbolic, of very high symbolic value. Maybe some more protection for Orthodox sites, though it's already huge in the Ahtisaari plan. Something that is, maybe solving the missing person issue, besides very important for the relatives of both sides, would be of a huge, symbolic value in Serbia. There needs to be some element of face saving for Mr. Vučić, but it cannot be done on sacrificing the status of Kosovo, and then have a debate about the real life issues and how to ensure future of Kosovo Serbs, Kosovo in general. And but will this be done? Can this be done after wasting so much time and really ending up in the complete wrong direction by all actors, including Ms. Mogherini? I have to be honest, I'm doubtful whether this is the time frame. I fear that this time dimension has been lost over what has happened over the last, already more than a year, and especially over the last 3-4 months.
Now, President Faust is in New York and he's trying desperately to meet President Trump. If he gets some kind of support from a higher official of the U.S., a part of what John Bolton said, how will this clash U.S. with Germany on should there be border changes in Balkans?
Well, there's a lot of talk. Is this shift of U.S. policy, maybe was it part of the Helsinki talk between Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin? I personally doubt this. For both administrations, Kosovo is really, very low on the issue, especially for the Trump administration. So this is more, to me, about an inconsistent Trump administration policy. So I doubt whether he will get any meeting. But even if he should get, listen, I know that, for Kosovo, historically, with the recent past, the U.S. was the main guarantor of the state integrity on the state of Kosovo. But I think there needs to be, and if there was some lesson to learn from the last 4 weeks, and I'm not saying this from some German patriotism, I really don't have one. Big one is, I think, and I said this in more recent interviews, I think as the angle of, securing Serbia's recognition that Kosovo is gone, which we have seen that it is there since after 2013, is, the conditionality with Serbia wanting to become a member state of the European Union. And Serbia is not asking for becoming the 50-something state of the US, Then, in this situation, I would say, though it sounds a little bit arrogant and maybe over the top, then I fear that the new reality is that Germany is the new US from a Christian perspective. Germany is the new US because you may remember, or maybe not, in 2010 when the Tadic regime in Belgrade clashed with the European Union and the West over its Kosovo policy, this holistic one about EU and Serbia after the ICJ ruling when he did not back down but doubled down on a UN General Assembly resolution. That was a very interesting visit by later the German Foreign Minister, then Westerwelle, but previously by the then UK Foreign Minister William Hague. And William Hague had a very clever statement then, which was overheard by many, on this policy of Serbia playing, on the 5 non-recognizers to divide and conquer with the EU. And he said, there's a misunderstanding on your side. In order to get into the EU, you don't need the 5 non-recognizers. You need the 24 recognizers. So I think in that sense, when we look from that perspective, this has not changed. Serbia is not, checking out of the EU perspective. Whether it's honest policy by Mr. Vučić or not, he cannot check out. Russia is there's no alternative except for complete isolation. Russia doesn't offer anything, any alternative integration. So even, you know, with some member states now showing a very inconsistent policy on the Balkans, on the land swap, like Austria, this statement still counts, and I would rephrase it today. They don't need the 5 non-recognizers, and they don't even need Serbia needs a few of the recognizers, like maybe Austria or French in a certain setting. They need all of the 22. That means at least they need all. If there's one member state of the recognizers not going along, you will not win any you know, shifting the whole direction of this dialogue. So I think this is still the situation. So that's why I said, you know, if you look at this from their perspective, the EU, despite its eroding, you know, leverage and strength, still has enough leverage to solve this dispute here and solve conflicts in the Balkans. You see it with the Greek-Macedonian agreement. If they really have resolved and really are decisive. So I mean, in the end, in this constellation, despite, you know, your historical linkage with the US, Germany is the more important country.
We'll finish it with that. Thank you very much for talking to KTV, Mr. Weber.
Thank you.